Glad to have you here with us today, Dr. White. First and foremost, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Long day at work, but I'm off now and I'm home, and yeah, I got through the traffic, and so I'm feeling a lot better now.
So today we wanted to delve a bit into your journey getting to this point and the different characteristics and attributes that you affiliate with, well, I guess you would say knowledge in general and your journey to get to this point overall. Would you be willing to answer some questions today?
Of course, of course.
All right, so I think the very, very first question that a lot of people in this journey probably face on, their path to success and overall personal achievement is, what do you do when you're faced with adversity?
That's a good question. I think one of the interesting things about adversity is that just about every single human being that's ever lived on the planet faces it at one point or another. How we deal with it is an entirely different thing, and it's highly individualized. I can tell you for myself, like everybody else, dealing with adversity can be very, very challenging at times. And one of the things I started doing about 4 years ago was to try to create these exercises where I essentially called them daily affirmations. And these affirmations were meant to instill positive thoughts or positive thinking into my head and to essentially rewire my brain to more of an optimistic, positive type mindset. And so, what's interesting is we hear about these types of things on the news and such, where people are manifesting or they're doing these I am exercises. It's something I found that is highly effective, but it doesn't work overnight. It's not a weekend retreat. This is something that takes a lot of time and takes a lot of practice. We're all kind of programmed in different ways in our brains, and we have a lifetime of programming essentially in our brains, and so turning this ship it's a large ship, so it takes time. And so for the better part of 4 years, while I was in my doctorate, I spent a lot of time doing the daily affirmations, and I found them to be very, very useful. And on top of that, I found them to have a lot of utility, especially when it came to dealing with adversity. So what's interesting is speaking positively to yourself or daily affirmations are effective, but they're far more effective when you're going through hard times. So if you're, going through, an easy time, the sun is out, everything is going great, it's not that those daily affirmations or that positive self-talk isn't helpful, but it becomes much more apparent how helpful it is when you are going through some trials and tribulations, when you're down on your luck. It becomes far more apparent that those positive words that you speak to yourself, those affirmations, have a real effect. They have a net effect, especially the longer that you do them. So the more time that you take, the longer that you spend practicing these affirmations and this positive self-talk, you become a lot more salient with that.
So I love the response. In terms of adversity, as many know within the journey of life, there are different obvious variables involved. One mainly being the involvement of one's discipline within what they're trying to achieve. So I would love to hear your feedback on your viewpoint on discipline and how it can help encourage one's growth without taking away from them or taxing them mentally.
Right. And I discussed this actually in another video. I think what's interesting about discipline is that first you have to go through the motions essentially, and that's difficult. To build discipline requires consistency and it requires time. I will say that in any factor in life or any facet of life, discipline plays a part. And I think that one of the things I've noticed in my own life is that the more consistent I am, or the more consistently I approach an aspect of my life. What's interesting with discipline is that it requires a certain amount of sacrifice initially. Consistency and time. So it requires discipline to build discipline. It's in an interesting way. I told my son this years ago. I said that we're actually at the gym. We've been training, and I had been training him for a number of years. And I looked over and I said, do you think this is about weights? And I had kind of a coy kind of look on my face. And I said, this was never about weights. This was about developing discipline. This was about building, habits, healthy, sustainable habits, And so I think in almost any aspect of our lives, we can develop discipline. It could be with school. It could be, intellectually. It could be spiritually. Whatever area of our life we feel that we need, or whatever area is being presented as an option at that moment, I feel that we can develop that level of discipline that we need to. What's important, though, I think, when it comes to terms when you're dealing with self-improvement and discipline, it's multifaceted. So. And I would venture to say it becomes a positive feedback loop. So the more facets, the more areas of our lives that we exercise discipline, the more of the net effect that it has on our general self-improvement, if that makes sense. So I think individuals, especially that are very tuned in to their development, their personal development, these are individuals that are probably also highly disciplined. And again, this discipline didn't all come at once. They built it over years.
So I like that you mentioned self-improvement. And obviously, there's so many different forms of self-improvement, as well as so many different forms of intelligence. Right. So I would like to delve a bit more into that. Within self-improvement, what do you kind of see as that embodiment of what we call self-improvement as a whole?
I think that self-improvement, there's a lot of different vehicles that you can take, okay? I think that, for some individuals, having a very strong religious background or a religious discipline is very important in this journey of self-discovery and this journey of self-improvement, right? Personal development. Other individuals may take more of a secular approach. I personally take a little bit more of a secular approach. I believe strongly in the idea of neuroplasticity. I believe that we have brains that are immensely capable of growth and the ability to change, to repair and to grow. And so I feel that you have to find something that resonates with you. For some people, it's exercise. I know some individuals that spend vast amounts of time exercising, and that they find that is a vehicle towards, a greater sense of self and such. So I think that it really depends. I personally like the I am daily affirmations. I use that as a primary catalyst for my self-improvement. And again, this is something that takes a very long time. It's not a weekend retreat. This is something that requires sustained effort over many, many years before you really start seeing the net effect of it. And really, at its root, it's essentially saying things to yourself that positive self-affirmations. You're saying positive things about yourself. And I think what's interesting about it is that we grow up, and many of us grew up in we've heard lots of negative things. We've heard lots of things that basically weren't necessarily flattering about us, right? And so I feel that of course, we absorb that information, and there's a negative net effect. So I think once we really start looking at ways to inject positive feedback into our lives, ways to talk to ourselves in a loving, compassionate way, and we do this over, again, a sustained period of time, it does change neural pathways. It does create new networks within our brains. And this has a very positive net effect on us. So I personally am biased. I like the daily affirmations, the I am, specifically the I am, affirmations, because I feel there's so much power in that. Especially when you think, saying something like, I am intelligent, I am beautiful, I am whatever that might be, whatever is important to you, whatever you're trying to address in your life. If you tell yourself that enough, your brain is going to start believing it. And again, that seems like a simple thing, like something that wouldn't necessarily move a mountain, but it does. Again, over an extended period of time, over years of doing it, it has an extreme positive effect, I think, on your life. And I could just say personally, this may be anecdotal, but for me personally, it has transformed my life in incredible ways.
Very, very good response. You mentioned a bit within self-confidence about the daily affirmations, which I really liked, and that's going to actually lead into my next question. So, a very big part of the human stigma and something that we deal with every single day that can sabotage us or benefit us if used correctly is the human ego. So what I wanted to dive a bit into is how you think it is possible to cultivate a healthy ego that doesn't end up sabotaging yourself in any way, because there are times in our life, obviously, where we may get over cocky or we may do things that can actually unintentionally hurt our growth. So I would just love to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Ego gets in the way all the time, many, many times. I feel that ego ends up many times sabotaging. If we allow it to, it'll sabotage our lives. We sabotage our lives, by not restraining our ego. I think one of the most important characteristics that we can have, personality characteristics, is humility. And and I want to qualify that. I want to say that humility isn't denouncing, or it's not a self-denunciation of your traits or talents or your abilities, but it's an acknowledgement of those, but without putting yourself above others, without putting anybody else down, without there's an element of critical thinking and reflectiveness to that, and I think that if that's probably the best way to check ego, is to be self-reflective, to anytime you start feeling that maybe you're smarter or that you're more capable than somebody else, that's your ego basically trying to superimpose itself, and take the stage. I think a much better approach, especially if you're a person that's trying to learn and grow and become a better version of yourself, is to be humble. Acknowledge your talents and gifts, of course, but do not compare those to other people. Compare yourself only to yourself. And I know that sounds much easier, or that's much easier said than done. But I think, like many things in life, if you practice it, if you exercise it, just like any muscle in your body, you get better at it. And I know when I was going through my doctorate, and I've mentioned this before, I had to check my ego a number of times. It was very easy at times to think of myself as being smarter or more capable, maybe than I was at that moment. And what I really needed to do was to listen and to self-evaluate and to utilize critical thinking. Those were very, very important things that needed to happen, and those helped check my ego, and it helped me become humble and to be teachable.
Very, very good response. And I loved how you worded that. It was very, very straightforward with how you feel, and I can't agree more. The next question I actually want to ask you within that is, how can you constantly find new ways to keep that growth mindset and keep the idea of constantly growing and bettering yourself on a daily basis?
That's tough, and this comes back to that discipline and comes back to that consistency. I think, at the core, it's something you really have to want. So I think, I think it first off requires a certain amount of self-evaluation and self-reflection, looking at where you're at right now and where you want to go or where you want to be. And if you feel like you want to make some changes and you feel like you want to become a better version of yourself, then you're going to embark on this journey. You're going to basically take this journey, and so I think those are kind of those first steps with that. I think that you have to consciously make a decision every day, much like when you go to the gym. If you go to the gym daily, or if you read, or if you whatever you consistently do each day, this is one of those things that you have to put at the forefront of your mind. You have to recognize that you're going to make certain time sacrifices daily to devote essentially to your personal growth, to your self-improvement. And again, that's going to be different for everybody. For some people, this is prayer. Prayer is a chance for people to be very self-reflective with them and their creator. This could be more secular, where you're taking inventory of yourself. You're looking at yourself and saying, what can I improve? Or maybe I struggled with some things today. Maybe I was angry or I was sad. So maybe sitting with those emotions and trying to understand them more, trying to understand more about yourself. I think the other part of this is learning to love the parts of yourself that are difficult to love. I asked a counselor of mine this a long time ago. I said, how do you love the parts of yourself that are difficult to love? And, she said something very interesting. She said, have you ever tried to put yourself in the shoes of that part of yourself? Have you ever tried to maybe see the world through that part of yourself? And it's interesting to think in those terms, especially when it comes to self-improvement, because if you really want to move the goalpost, if you really want to get some traction within self-improvement, being reflective is so important, and I think it's synonymous with self-improvement. And again, I think the little things that we do every day have a huge net effect, ultimately.
I could not agree more, and I have one final question to not only kind of summarize what we talked about, but to also kind of give a little bit of your own personal experience within the matter. But obviously within this journey to achieve the best version of ourselves, one of the things that we struggle with the most in general is a way to balance everything.
Balance.
So how would you interpret the idea of balance, and for somebody who's embarking on this journey to achieving a better version and potentially the greatest version of themselves at some point, which we all ideally strive for, how would you go about balancing yourself along the way?
I like that statement, the greatest version of ourselves. Of course, self-improvement is an iterative process. We keep evolving and growing. So that's a great question, balance. And it's a bit elusive for a lot of people. I think in life it's very, very easy to be lopsided. I think human beings are exceptionally good at hyper-focusing on something and just putting, betting and doubling down on that one area in life. I think it becomes much more difficult when you have more than one ball in the air. So when you're juggling multiple balls, it really truly does become an exercise in balance, right? So how do you balance work? How do you balance your school, if you're in school, your family life? All these things that demand bits and pieces of us, that require us to wear different masks. How do we balance this? I think at the core of self-improvement, there's a part of it that is devoted almost completely to that idea of balance. I think when a person becomes out of balance in one way or the other, they're focusing too much on work or their family or maybe school, and they're not giving enough attention to every other requires their attention in life. That's not the road. They're basically veering off the road to self-improvement at that point. So I think it is necessary. I think first and foremost, it is absolutely necessary to understand that we need balance. Balance is essential. It's critical in our lives if we want to become the best versions of ourselves or the greatest versions of ourselves, right? So how do we do that? I think much like everything else, we practice. And I think it takes time. I think, one of the things we need to absolutely have is we have to give ourselves grace and we have to be patient with ourselves. And understand that all these different areas that we want to balance, we're not going to do it over a weekend. And it's not an all or nothing proposition, right? This is going to be nuanced. There's going to be gradients. And we're going to have to be able to forgive ourselves for areas that we may neglect. But I think over time, as we practice, as we put a little more time into our workouts, and then put a little time into, extra time over here into our family, into work, I think as we prioritize these different areas in our lives, we start becoming much better, and we become more capable of balancing even more. I think, some of the most productive people out there are people that we would look at their schedules and be mind-boggled by how they're able to accomplish so much, but they live these rich, full lives that are full of so many different things, but they've learned to balance them, and they live within this harmony, and they understand what they can do and what they can't do. They don't overdo it either, so they have to find that perfect mix of not doing too much and not too little. But I do feel that over time, especially as we get better at balancing different areas of our lives, our capacity for it grows exponentially.
Very, very good response. And I actually want to go ahead now before we wrap this up. And I want to ask you, if you were to meet somebody who was very new to the idea of self-improvement, maybe they're having a hard time in their life, they're scatterbrained, and they just don't entirely know what they want to do or how to achieve the goals they have in mind, what advice would you give somebody who was trying to embark on that journey to finding the best version of themselves?
I would have them do one thing. I would have them start with one thing. I think that many times in life we get overwhelmed because we try to do too many things at once, especially when, the idea of self-improvement is exciting, right? It's exciting to have a plan, to put something into motion. We feel like we have a certain sense of control and accomplishment. But then we burn out very quickly. It's like a person that goes to the gym that hasn't gone in a long time. They want to do everything at the gym, and they want to start training like a person that's been training for years. That's not possible. You have to take baby steps. And so I would suggest find one area in your life that is really important to you, an area that really resonates with you, that you want to change, that you want to improve. And I would focus on that one area. What's interesting about self-improvement is that if you start in one area, there is this tendency to have that spill over into other areas of your life. And I've seen this numerous times where a person will focus on one thing in their life, something they have control over, and they'll get good at it. They'll exercise that part of themselves, and they'll get good at it, and then it ends up spilling it over into other areas of their lives. And again, there's this net effect, this positive net effect of that. And like I said earlier, as you exercise, as you find different areas of your life that you improve on, you can improve on, and you're maybe doing them one by one here and there, you get better at it. And your ability to really work on different areas of your life becomes far more effective. So I think, again, start with one thing, something that really is important to you, something you're passionate about, that you really want to change. I think it has to be important. For me, I remember years ago, it was exercise. In my family, I've watched different individuals struggle. So I think, for me, it was something I could get passionate about. I could get passionate about working out, exercising, eating right. But again, it's going to be different for everybody. For some people, maybe going back to school, maybe doing something, or maybe training for a specific job. But I feel that every single person can absolutely find one area that they can start improving themselves with. And then again, as I said, there's this tendency for it to flourish and to grow into other aspects and areas of their lives.
I am just gotta say, I'm very, very blown away with your responses. I think you gave a lot of very useful information, and thank you for your time, Dr. White, and thank you for everything you were able to give us.
Great, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.